Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you on the Object 705. This is the Tier 9 Soviet heavy tank, and it is a side-scraping, rear-turreted monster. Firstly, I'm going to give you a full statistical rundown of the Object 705, show you how it stacks up to some of its Tier 9 heavy tank competition, follow it up with some Ace Tanker gameplay, and if you have no interest in picking up this tank at all, then I'll highlight some of its weaknesses so you can take advantage of them when you meet them on the battlefield. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing to mention about the Object 705 is it actually has a choice of two competitive guns on the vehicle. Now, interestingly enough, if you're a seasoned player and you've already got the Object 257, then you'll have the 122mm BL131A gun unlocked on this tank before you pick it up. And also, if you have the IS-7, then there's a 130mm S70 gun that is also on this tank that you will have unlocked. So that actually makes the experience grind, or shall I say, the amount of free experience that you might want to spend on the Object 705 rather cheap to get it fully equipped. And furthermore, look how little experience you actually need to be able to get the Tier 10 705A. Only 162,000. That's very cheap to get a Tier 10 tank, and that's because of these two expensive guns. And so if you've already made your way towards the IS-7, then this could be one of the easiest pickups in the game for you. The next question you're probably asking is, which gun should you use on the vehicle? Should you use the 122mm, which I'm going to be displaying on the left, or the 130mm, which I'm going to be displaying on the right? Right off the bat, damage per minute advantage for the lower caliber gun, 10% higher, and the penetration is pretty much the same, 2mm advantage for the 130. However, what happens if you dab the 2 key in this tank? Well, it gets 315mm of heat pen, or it can get 303mm of APCR pen. So do take that into account that the heat pen on this vehicle is rather weak, at least compared to a lot of the premium rounds on the other Tier 9 vehicles. Alpha damage wise is 440 compared to 490, but look at the difference in the shell velocity, and that's because this 122mm gets APCR as standard, 1,259 meters per second. That feels amazing for me and snapshotting, especially at long ranges. Furthermore, the amount of ammunition you can carry is much larger with the 122mm, which can really help in prolonged battles, or if you just don't want to have to fire so much heat when you've run out of APCR. Apart from this, the only difference in the gun handling is the fact that the accuracy is way better with the 122mm, although it's still not very good. And so for me personally, I would recommend using the 122mm on this vehicle, which is great because it's actually the first gun that you get, and you can use it even with the stock turret. So now let's see how the Object 705 with the 122mm main armament compares to a variety of its Tier 9 competition, in the form of the Object 257, the ST1, the WZ-11114, and the E75. So immediately, damage per minute advantage here. And its penetration is right in the middle, slightly less than that of the ST1, but still by no means bad. Also, shell velocity, massive advantage for the APCR is standard on this tank. How about the gun handling? Well, it's definitely not the best. The E75 wins here, but it's definitely not the worst, as the ST1 falls behind significantly. But 3 seconds aim time is still 3 seconds, and the gun dispersion values don't really make up for this. This tank has a lot of aim time unless you want to use a gun lane drive in addition to the vertical stabilizers, but then you're kind of having to sacrifice vents or coated optics on this tank, which for me doesn't make sense with 3 seconds aim time. As I mentioned, the accuracy on this tank is very mediocre at 0.4, so you don't really want to be sniping at long ranges unless you're engaging lightly armored targets that you're going to go through, irrelevant of hitting weak points or not. And just like the 257 and the 11114, that 5 degrees of gun depression just feels really awkward, and this is where the ST1 and the E75 have a massive advantage over this tank. So now onto mobility. Is it great news for the Object 705 here? Well, not really. 40 kilometers an hour is by no means bad, but it's not nearly as good as the Object 257 or the 11114. But the power to weight ratio on this tank kind of makes up for this, well, at least a little bit, with 13.89, which gives an advantage over the ST1 and a big advantage over the E75. But again, the worst ground resistances in this comparison once again balance that out and make this feel a little bit sluggish. A feeling which is compounded with the track traverse, which is a lowly 24 degrees a second, which means that this tank takes a long time to turn, and is the worst in this comparison, apart from the ST1 on soft terrain, and very marginally. So far, not really good news for the gun handling, the firepower, and the mobility of this vehicle. Is it going to be made up for in the armor? And the answer is, well, kind of yes and kind of no. Look at this armor, 155 on the front, 90 at the side, that's great. 60 at the rear, that's not particularly fantastic compared to something like an E75, but the turret armor, 300, 150, 100. 200. All in all, pretty good news for this tank, but let's see how its 3D model compares. Okay, well, immediately we find that it's got 120 millimeters of lower plate armor, but it's fairly well angled. So look what happens when you kind of angle the Object 705 out like this. You still got about 240 millimeters of lower plate armor, and if your opponent is slightly taller than you and tries to aim down on it, quite a few tanks are going to ricochet. The upper plate is 155 millimeters thick, but it's just so well angled that pretty much when you angle the tank correctly like this, your upper hull armor is going to bounce everything apart from premium rounds from tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. And luckily the turret at the top of the tank is 60 millimeters thick, which means only armor piercing rounds from the FV215B183 and the FV4005 are going to overmatch, and everything else is going to have a very tough time getting through this turret. It is an absolute beast, and I would feel absolutely comfortable sitting hull down against every tank in the game, apart from maybe a tier 10 tank destroyer or something that's just firing premium rounds at you constantly and hitting your upper plate. But if you're only exposing your turret, I'll let anything in the game shoot me that isn't firing high explosive rounds. Now, what's absolutely incredible about this vehicle is the way that the side armor is angled. See this whole fin coming out here. So this means that even if you over angle the side armor on this tank, it's like a shot catch, 300 millimeters here. They have to come all the way to here before they're able to penetrate the side of this tank. And so if you're shooting one of these, never ever ever shoot it in the mid plate unless you've got it completely flush. Otherwise, more often than not, it's going to be absorbed. In addition to this has got 30 millimeters of spaced armor over the hull, and that will absorb heat rounds like a total boss as well. Now, this tank has kind of a side angled plate here, a lot like on something like a Type 5 Heavy, but the difference is it's not flat. You see how well angled it is here, and so even if you turn this plate to the side, it kind of becomes a weak point, but it's not an absolute tragic weak point. And if you keep this going forwards and backwards, it can be quite tricky for the enemies to be able to find it. But obviously, considering this tank has a rear-mounted turret, the main advantage that it has is going to be side scraping. And if you get the tank on a corner like this, just take a look at how effective it's going to be. The whole of the side here is an auto ricochet, the whole of the upper side is, the turret is impenetrable, and they're going to need about 300 millimeters to go through the upper hull armor. But be very careful in this tank, because tiny little bits of over angling can actually mean that they will be able to go through your tracks. And so as a rule of thumb, try and get the gun going over this little bit of angled armor or in between your front plate and your tracks, and then you'll be absolutely okay side scraping against pretty much everything. And this has been a very powerful mechanism for me. There are so many tanks that you can just negate all of their damage from. And while side scraping in World of Tanks is nothing new, very few tanks do it better at tier 9 than the Object 705. In addition to this, the vehicle has one of the highest hit points at tier 9 of 2,000. 380 meters view range is definitely nothing to write home about, and this thing can be quite blind at long range unless you have an exceptionally skilled crew or you're using coated optics. And so take that into account if you're playing your medium or your light tanks, or even some of your tank destroyers against this tank, that you're quite likely to get the drop on it, a lot like an ST1. So what kind of equipment and crew skills do I recommend for the Object 705? Well, firstly, take a gun rammer unless you're a muppet. Also, vertical stabilizers, I feel like you have to because of the dispersion values on this vehicle, and so that only really leaves a choice for the third slot. Now, personally for me, I'm going to use improved ventilation class 3 because that's going to make everything about my tank pretty much about 2.5% better. But if you absolutely utterly depend on your view range, then you probably want to be taking coated optics. Or even if you have a terrible crew, maybe binocular telescope, but you shouldn't really be sitting still long enough to be able to make that work. Alternatively, if you absolutely despise the aim time on this tank, you might want to take a gun laying drive, but for me, 3 seconds aim time really feels like the crossover for where I would want to use a gun lane drive or use improved vents. So crew skills wise, you want to take repairs first on your entire crew. Next, obviously, you want to get Sixth Sense on your commander, and then once you've got 3 skills, you retrain, you get Brothers in Arms on all of your crew, Sixth Sense on your commander, and then obviously train repairs again. And then for the 4th skill on the commander, I like to use situational awareness to buff that view range up a little bit. For the gunner, the clear choice after repairs is snapshot, and then personally I wanted to take armorer, although I'm thinking about changing that to firefighting or possibly designated target, which is a perk. For the driver, after repairs, I love clutch braking on this vehicle because the traverse speed is awful and you have to get your frontal armor around. After that, maybe preventative maintenance, off-road driving, those kind of things. And finally, the loader, probably one of the least important crew members. Repairs, then you want to take safe stowage, and then something like firefighting because the concealment rating on this vehicle is so poor anyway that it's not really worth buffing it up. But anyway, I think that's quite enough jibber jabber. Let's get stuck into the gameplay. So we're going to be playing on Malinovka, and this is the dream scenario for this vehicle. I would like to clarify that this is as good as it can possibly be for this tank. You've got your +2 matchmaking, there's no artillery, and we're also going to go fight on top of a hill which should be covering most of our lower plate, and we're going to get to side scrape obviously against the windmill. So that was the first thing that I was thinking as soon as I spawned in on Malinovka encounter, is that windmill is key. Usually the team that controls the hill then pushes down the hill and then manages to clear up the enemy team. As soon as their tank destroyers start getting spotted along the bottom, the hill is just a huge advantage. Now, of course, that's not going to happen every single time, but for a vehicle like this, when you're a slow tank, and just look how slow we are to be able to get up the hill here, barely going at 15, 14, 13, and this isn't exactly the biggest slope that you're ever going to have to go up in World of Tanks. You're not going to be racing forwards into position, and remember, this is pretty much as good as it can be for this vehicle. I've got a good engine and my crew skills are perfect with Brothers in Arms. I'm even using a premium consumable on this tank, so please do take that all into account. This is a very sluggish vehicle. But just because something's sluggish, it doesn't really matter as long as when you get there that you get the job done. And I'm immediately thinking, let's try and shoot the M103, and I make a bit of a misplay there. I was tunnel visioning on that M103 so much that I actually completely ignore the Jagdpanther and the Tiger P in front of me. Let's just put that into perspective, that the Tiger P was able to get there before this tank. Maybe I got a bad spawn, didn't really think that I got a bad spawn on this map. I don't think I could have probably got a better spawn, just because this tank is so slow that even a sluggish tank like a Tiger P will be able to get to those frontal positions a little bit faster than you. Oh no, there's the .4 accuracy rearing its ugly head as we're unable to hit that Jagdpanther's frontal plate. But luckily I'm going to develop some synergy here with the VK100P sitting right next to me, while the 10001P, can't miss that 01 out, it's so important. Then I'm going to use him to cover me from the M103, and that will allow me to start to go to town on the Jagdpanther. Now, one thing that I guess I've really enjoyed about this vehicle is the rate of fire. Now, 2,200 DPM is pretty good for a tier 9 heavy. It's not fantastic. Oh, there you go. Right into the top weak point there of the M103. But it's by no means terrible. We've seen some tier 9 heavy tanks having a lot lower damage per minute than this tank, and it can definitely help you in a trading engagement when you know that you're going to be able to get that extra shot in against something like a 257, for example. And I'm not going to get the extra shot in against the M103, but at least my alpha damage is higher. So now he's learned, okay, doesn't want me to hit his weak point, and so he's wiggling there, but I swear that one just must have grazed the top of his tank, or alternatively it might have just gone straight through. Maybe a bit of RNG there. Am I claiming a ghost shell in a tank review? No, not really. Oh, that one just went high. That is the .4 accuracy in mediocre aim time. So now that I saw that the VK was on low health, I decided to go on the inside of him to protect him from the M103, and it's kind of working out. Look how much damage we've already managed to block. 1,715. I would be dead if I hadn't been blocking all of that damage, but this sneaky Tiger P actually managed to put one, I believe, into my lower plate there. Okay, just waiting. There's the ticket. I'm just trying to take hit off that tier 9 heavy tank, and there you go, the weak lower plate on this tank. I think it was about 120 millimeters thick. That's not great, so you want to try and angle it as much as possible. But then again, you know, when they miss that lower plate, or even if they just shoot down onto it, then you will be able to ricochet, and that's all she wrote for the tier 9 heavy tank. And so I was thinking, oh, really positive right now, should be okay from here on, but the 5 degrees of gun depression doesn't allow me to depress the gun enough to be able to shoot the Lerva in the hull armor. I try and whiff one of his turret, doesn't work out. And I don't know what my team have been doing lower down, but we've had a lot of very good players who have, for some reason, got their tanks completely dealt. Well, they're in the garage right now, or maybe they're just watching this thinking, oh god, what have I done? But then again, they're all in low tier tanks, right? So you can't really blame them all that much in this kind of matchmaking. Talking about low tier tanks, that Panther is going to have to go pick another one in the garage now. I'm just looking for the M103, sorry, the IS-3, but the Lerva there puts a round into my gun. You can see why I quite like to use the Armorer perk on this tank. Nevertheless, I decide that I want to be fully accurate, so I use my repair kit on the gun to try and make the gun accurate enough with that .4 accuracy to go into this Lerva, and that bounce, so I decide to start to fire some heat rounds. I believe for the first time this game, not sure if I've fired any heat rounds so far, I wasn't keeping tracks, but I thought, well, I've just got to get the damage out right now. This game is so close, and the 240 millimeters or so of penetration this tank has, not really reliable enough to go through the lava all the time. And when your damage per minute is 2,200, which again isn't bad for a tier 9, but it's certainly not great for a tier 9, you can't afford misses in these very close games where you're down on tanks. And this 0.4 accuracy, unless you're at point blank or you're shooting at weakly armored targets, the heat rounds do give you an advantage. And there you go. I just ricochet an APCR round off the IS-3. I'm going to try and fire another one into him. And at this stage of the game, I was just wishing that, oh, look at that. That literally tried to miss that tank as much as possible, that 0.4 accuracy. I should have probably fired a heat round at the IS-3 previously, because like I'm not going to need those 4 APCR rounds for the rest of this battle. So far so good. The first 5 minutes, nearly 5,000 damage dealt and 437 spotting. And we bounced the large caliber gun there from the Conway for 600 alpha damage. So I'm going to have to watch out for him, because that is a big old slug to take. There you go, WZ, 470, nice roll there, and I was actually managing to spot him not too bad, and the Conway reveals himself. This would be such a big shot for us if we can make it. Oh, come on, no! Oh, that's absolutely painful. That's the remaining tier 9 tank on the enemy team, and he's still going to be alive. Now going for the T-43. Yeah, ricochet. You're starting to see this vehicle very frustrating at mid to long ranges, right? Felt like I should have been a little bit more dominant there, so I decide, okay, I'm not doing very well at long range, let's go take the fight to the enemy team at point blank. Now we bounce around from the lava, we take the pen from the lava, we bounce the round from the Steher Waffenträger, and now I decide, well, at short to mid-range, surely they're not going to be able to avoid me too much. Now I know the T-43 is down there with the Conway, and oh, that sneaky T-43 actually managed to make it to the rock. Great play by him to go and flank. He's going to get some view range for his team now. And that little play there by the T-43 completely slows me down, because now I know that if I go out into the open, that the Conway is going to be able to slap me with that big alpha damage gun, and that T-43 just keeps spotting me. Very well played to this T-43. Beavis, damn, you're making me look like a butthead right now, dude. And great play, though, to be able to flank there. That's just what you need to do in your low-tier mediums and your lights. When you've got the big old, sluggish, heavy tank advancing towards you, that while its armor is all focused frontally, you know, its side armor isn't very good, and so that T-43 is probably going to be able to contest me, even with, I believe, the 85mm gun that tank has. It's barely got a better gun than the T-34-85, right? Not the best gun to have on a tier 7 tank, about 140mm of pen, or a lot higher if he decides to dab the 2 key. But right now I've made my way into a bush. Can you believe a heavy tank just sneaking here? I'm hoping that the T-43 thinks that I've moved, and if I can stay hidden here, I'm hoping the enemy team are going to do something like expose themselves, which will allow me to be able to put one into them. And right now I was just praying that my team would advance. Maybe the VK could go down there, maybe the UDES could go up around the hill, maybe try and sneak to this location over here. But there you go, I put a round at the T-43, but again, he just manages to pull back in time. But luckily, it looks like the VK puts a round into the T-43, and so now he's a one-shot for us, and he gets hit again. Oh, good stuff, a little bit more spotting for me. But with the pressure on the cap circle, I make my way over here, and this is where the poor view range of this tank comes into play. Maybe I should be using coated optics, but obviously this is, you've seen how good this tank is at firing at long range. Why would you want the coated optics in the first place, right? I feel like you've got to specialize this tank, and for me that's to specialize at the short to mid-range combat. But look how the armor's holding up. It's doing a great job. We bounced the Steher, Waffenträger again, the T-25, and that Conway exposed himself a little bit. I'm not going to give him time to fully aim the shell at me. That Conway, to all intents and purposes, might be firing Hesh rounds now, considering he bounced the first round off me. If he's firing Hesh rounds of the big derpy gun, which they do get, then he's going to be doing reliable splash damage. But the timer keeps ticking on. Now 2 minutes left until they're managing to cap out. 5 degrees of gun depression, not quite enough, but the Conway derps into the ridge. We don't miss. We put him down to 600 hit points. Now starting to feel fairly confident now. 6,500 damage up, but 1 minute and 30 seconds left. And my team just, they haven't moved. They're just chilling there. What are they expecting to happen? And so I decide, okay, I have to advance, I have to go do this, and I'm going to have to drive out in front of pretty much 5 vehicles now, which I'm really not looking forward to, but I'm going to try and do it for the team because I want to win right now, and I'm not looking to try and just farm a little bit more damage in this game. Okay, so I'm going to push forwards. The T-43 slams one into my side with a standard round pen. The Steyr Waffenträger puts one into me. I fire one into him. I'm thinking about repairing, but I want to keep a hold of my repair kit. Now I decide to finally use it because the pressure's on me so much, and the Conway comes around the corner, and it looks like the Conway pens a Hesh round there against my lower plate. An absolute disaster, and from here on, yeah, there's not much going for the team. You can see I draw on the map to try and get the attention for the UDES to flank around to be able to shoot the people that were inside the cap circle, but unfortunately that's all she wrote for me. And what a shame that all of those experienced players in the low tier tanks on my team threw their lives away, while all of the experienced players in the low tier tanks on the enemy team stayed in it and showed just how vulnerable this vehicle is if it does get caught out in the open. So a bit of a heartbreak here, but the sweetener was this was still an ace tanker for our loss due to that high caliber giving us courageous resistance. Nearly 7,000 damage dealt here, 1,000 spotting, double what anyone else on the enemy team was able to achieve, but not enough to give us a victory. Now we did fire quite a lot of ammunition here, but we still make a profit as we made sure to fire all of those APCR rounds first, and it's not often that you're going to have to do so much damage in your tier 9 heavies. And look how well our armor held up in this game, 6,700 block. That's enough to kill this tank 3 times over. And it's games like these that have been giving me very respectable stats in the Object 705. I've won 78% of the first 40 games that I've played in this tank, and that's without a platoon, dealing nearly 3,000 damage a game and blocking on average 2,000 damage per game. It really is truly solid, and for me it's on par with the AMX M451 that I recently reviewed on this channel. And there's one thing for certain, that this tank is so much better than the absolute horrible tank that I had to grind through to get it. The ISM was one of my least favorite tanks that I have ever played in World of Tanks. It was slow, sluggish. Its gun really wasn't very good in any regard. Didn't have enough penetration to really contest the tier 9 and tier 10 matchups that I was constantly getting into. And the tank's armor is really nothing to write home about unless you're in a good matchup, which just doesn't happen to tier 8. And so if currently, like me, you are struggling with the ISM, just try and grit your teeth, bear it, maybe take it out in the frontline game mode and see if you can mop up a lot of experience, because for me personally the 705 was totally worth it, and I think I'm definitely going to be keeping a good crew in this tank even when I get the tier 10, but we'll just have to wait and see. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say that this was the best tier 9 Soviet heavy tank, I mean there are 4 of them in the game now, and I think the SD1 is still very strong. The T10, it's just a bit of a faster, kind of a bit more of a medium tank, and the 257 just has that absolutely trollish armor. I think the Object 705's side-scraping capacity makes it different enough to definitely warrant a look up. And so ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this tank review, or it was maybe just useful for you. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it for whatever reason, make sure you give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments if you've played the Object 705. Do you think it's an incredible vehicle, or did you absolutely hate it? And if you've played the tier 10, have I got something to look forward to? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.